Right. So, are you wondering what the cost would be to become a writer? And we're not just talking financial, but all the work involved. That's what we're going to talk about today on Reality Coaching for Writers. I'm here with Eddie Jones. And Eddie, what do we offer writers?
The real stuff and no fluff. And in case you're wondering what this is, Benny came out. She go, "What happened to your chin?" I said, "I took it on the chin." I mean, this is part of the price of being a writer. Sometimes you just take it on the chin. So yeah, I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's been helping me at Moore Square on Sundays. He's a writer, a young writer. And at the end of the day, Diana, we had a great time Sunday. It was pouring down rain for most of the time we were down there handing out sandwiches and chips and candy and, spending time with people praying. And Sunday was a rainy day, but we had a great time. And at the end, Caleb and I were just sitting in the back of my car, and he's got a couple of kids' books he's working on, children's books. And he said, "Does it scare you to be a writer?" He was asking me. And I went, "Oh yeah. I mean, it's terrifying, especially if you're an introvert, right? I mean, introverts typically, we're reserved, right? We don't want people into our space, and that's where a lot of writers are. And yet the writing process itself, and if you're going to try to do this for a while, it means you're going to be completely vulnerable. And so we talked a little bit about that. And I was just wondering if any of your clients, if you ever had difficulty kind of pulling things from them, getting them over the hump of working on the project and actually submitting the project. Did that ever come up?
All the time. I had so many writers that had a vision for what they were writing. But then when it came down to it, they'd do the work, they'd sit in the chair, they'd write the book, and then they would drag their feet on getting that proposal together, because that's when the fear would come in. Fear of rejection, but also fear of success as well. So all the time. I think an agent, and Eddie, you and I do that as writing coaches, we spend most of our time being cheerleaders.
Yeah, that is a lot of it. You're right. I hadn't really thought about that until we got into this business, but that is a lot of what we're doing is we're just trying to pull that project out of the author and get it submitted somewhere and get it out there somewhere. Yeah, this is one of those. I was telling Caleb, this is one of those weird vocations where the product that's evaluated is yourself. And that very rarely happens in any industry. If you put a Ford Motor Company comes out with a new version of a Mustang and it tanks, Ford itself gets blamed, but not the guy necessarily that came up with the design. Rarely do we know who the design, one person that came up with the design and said, "I want to do this." Now, Steve Jobs, when he was running Apple, he was involved in the iPhone and all that. But rarely does that happen. I mean, a bridge, nobody complains about that. Potholes in the roads, nobody complains about the engineer that designed the road or the traffic. You don't hear who the people are. But in a book, in a blog post, kind of what Andy was doing, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about blogging. You're putting your name out there. And for a large degree, that's the essence of who you are. And if people don't like it, they're saying, "I don't like you," into some sense. And I was wondering how did some of your clients deal with that vulnerability of not wanting to put themselves out there even after they finish the project?
Well, and other than cheerleading, the other thing I seem to have spent a lot of time in was talking writers off the wall. They out of quitting. They just wanted to jump off the, bridge into the river or quit, because when it gets down to, like you said, Eddie, it's so hard to handle rejection, which is a big part of writing. I mean, I don't know how many successful authors have dealt with rejection after rejection. I always say the help was rejected 40 times. The Shack was rejected by 40 publishers and then self-published. You know, the thing is, if you stay with it, you learn something and then you become a better writer, and your writing benefits, your reader benefits. So it is part of it, learning to stick it out, learning that you said last week, Eddie, that writing is a calling. And when it is, you can't walk away from that. You shouldn't. And so it's tempting to, it's discouraging at times, but just learn to persevere and learn what it is that encourages you. And for me, anything that I'm dealing with, I need to be around life-giving people, people that speak life into me and aren't Debbie Downers. Don't hang out with the Debbie Downers. Don't join a writers group that is just a group of woe is me and hates the industry. I mean, we have our grievances, Eddie and I, with the industry, but we also appreciate the industry and know, you know, not everybody's going to get a traditional book contract, but look at all the good books out there that they have vetted and they have professionally packaged and that are saying wonderful things. So, you know, it's that balance of not quitting
Yeah.
when times get hard.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of pick on one of my favorite writers, and that's Paul, the Apostle Paul, because I really enjoy the wisdom of Paul and the way he pulled together the message of the gospel and makes it so powerful. And yet, Paul is one of those writers that you can just quote some parts of the Bible to somebody, you know, who's kind of familiar with it, and they'll go, "Oh, that has to be Paul." He's the only one that would write a backward sentence this way, where you had to stop and turn around and stand on your head to go, "Oh, now I get what he's trying to say," because that's Paul's voice. And I'm convinced when we get to heaven and have a chance to sit down and talk with him, he'll speak the very same way. He'll be talking to us the very same way, and that's part of the voice part of it. And that's what Kayla and I were talking about, is one, there's the vulnerability of putting yourself out there and having people go, "Well, yeah, you can write, but I think that was a terrible story. I mean, it was just awful. I didn't like it," you know, and having people say that about you. But then there's also the other risk of you just didn't have a very good voice. You know, it's kind of like musicians, singers. You know, we don't like the way they sing. Well, that's, again, for them, that's very personal. You know, Bob Dylan is one of my favorite, but he's a lot of people's favorite. You know, he's got a unique voice. So it is one of those things, and I don't know that. And I'm just being transparent. I don't know that we ever get over that, Diana. I mean, I've got, I think, maybe 14 books out now. And I'm not sure I ever get comfortable putting a book out. I don't know that I ever do. It's always terrifying. And I think what I wanted to say today, I just wanted to share that. We talked before we came on, this might be a very short episode. But for some reason, I just felt like that maybe that's something we needed to share today, because I think there's probably somewhere a writer that's watching or listening to this right now that's on the fence, and they could go either way. You know, to your point, if they get a Debbie Downer whispering in their ear, they're going to hear that as confirmation that I don't need to do this. I don't need to write this post. Maybe there's somebody else that goes, I wanted to, wasn't going to, maybe now I will.
I hope so, because I think more than ever, we need voices that are speaking into us, providing good stories. I was looking, I'll give you an example. I was looking for something to watch on Prime Video the other night, and I was scrolling through, and there was pretty much everything that was worth watching I've watched before, either on their streaming or another streaming device. And so I thought, I hear a lot about this, gets rave reviews, I'm going to watch this particular show. I watched one and there was offensive language, but the struggle was very relatable to me. It was a woman, finding her own way. But then I watched a second and then I watched a third because good writing hooked me in. But at the end of the third one, I had to have a talk with myself and say, do I really want this kind of language coming into my head? And I realized, no, I don't. I don't. And the interesting thing was the next day I was out on the beach and I was thinking about something and a word came into my head that would have never been in there if I hadn't watched that. And so I guess what I'm saying is I am grateful for good writers that write from a Christian worldview, a good story, not preachy, not come to Jesus fiction all the time, good story that's clean, that's relatable because it talks about genuine struggles that human beings have in relationships. And I think, I want to say, please write because we need that. And we don't know how much longer we'll have the opportunity to without harsh censorship coming down on us. But also the other thing, Eddie, you mentioned is the vulnerability. Every good relationship, though, we have to put ourselves out there and be vulnerable. God's a relational God. He wants to be in relationship with us. And we just need to expand as writers our personal relationships to include readers.
Yeah.
And
that's the hard part for me is they don't know me, they don't know my heart, they're only judging me based on the words I put on the page. That's as they should. It's one of those where if they're judging me based on my heart, then I'm catching an extra grade. I'm picking a letter grade up that probably I didn't deserve, right? Because he's a nice guy. We'll bump him up. No, if I'm not doing the work, I'm not doing the work. The last thing I think I'll close with is when you were talking, I was thinking of our friend Yvonne Lehman.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking about being vulnerable and about doing the calling thing that came to you, because I was thinking back in the 90s when she felt called to start the Blue Ridge Conference, Blue Ridge Christian Writers Conference. And because of that, Blue Ridge is still running. The Florida Christian Writers Conference is going, and I don't know that would have happened. I don't know that Eva Marie and Mark would have started that conference if Yvonne hadn't have been running the Blue Ridge Conference. There were so many things that came out of Yvonne just saying yes to that one nudge that we just don't know. We just don't know until we just say yes and take that vulnerable step and go out there. So for me, to those watching today is if you're on the fence, fall on the side where you think Jesus is. And then if you hit hard, maybe he'll just let him gently pick you back up and walk with you wherever he's taking you. So, any closing comments from you, Diana?
Just subscribe to this podcast because we want to encourage you. If you have no other positive voices speaking into you, let us be one of those. But we'll also introduce you to many more because God's blessed us to know special people. So subscribe and come back in and even suggest to us what you'd like us to address and talk about. But we appreciate you and we want to be here for you. So that's all I have to say. Please, like Eddie said, just give yourself the grace and fall on the side of Jesus. That's a good word picture, Eddie. I like that. I'm going to leave them with that.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, this has been fun. We'll chat next week on something
probably
more writing related than this, a little more detail. Thanks, Diana.